our president, let me just get myself together here. Our president, Her Grace, Manikanya Devidasi, has ordered me to try to address a little bit the topic, Krishna consciousness, the perfection of all cultures. What do you think of that? Could be a pretty controversial idea. But anyway, that's what she told me I must do, and I will do it, or try. Krishna consciousness, the perfection of all cultures. That's a very interesting subject. It's a really interesting subject, actually. First of all, though, could you please repeat after me? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Yes, and I hope all is well. I hope everyone's okay. You're okay?
Yes, I'm trying.
Okay. Everything all right?
Trying.
Good enough. Survived. Right, okay, so Krishna consciousness, the perfection of all cultures. It's, like I said, it's a very interesting subject. Cultures, there are all sorts of cultures around the world, different nationalities with the particular habits and, perspectives and things like that they have, languages, and these all kind of constitute culture. I mean, this term culture actually is quite a broad type of term. There's culture in the sense of like art, music, dancing, things like that, literature, and all that sort of thing. And then there's culture in the sense, more like habits or like social norms, just the ways people in different groups, could be different nationalities, could just be different companies. You can have a corporate culture. I know when I was young, I was, would you believe, a journalist. Are any of you journalists? No? Anyway, that's okay. I was a journalist for about 4 years. And we had what were called the style for the use of English, how we would spell different words, different types of grammatical forms that we would use and not use. This was the newspaper's style. And we had to learn that. And it's like a culture, you could say, a subculture. Yeah. And I don't know if you're familiar with British history much, but there was a Queen Victoria who was very famous, I don't know, 100 years ago plus. Heard of Queen Victoria? A little bit. You didn't miss much if you did. Yeah. So Queen Victoria, she was a powerful lady, and well, anyway, one time, I'm sure you've heard of Mahatma Gandhi. he was asked the question, what do you think of Western culture? And his answer was, I think it would be a good idea. I hope you got that one. In other words, there is no such thing, actually. It's just sort of like rubbish. And Queen Victoria, she was Empress of India, and she went there, I don't know how many times, but at least once. And they're having a meal, and there's a practice there at the end of the meal, at least in the very sort of upper class type of society, that at the end, everyone is given a little bowl of not lemon juice, but lemony water, which, because they eat with their fingers, which you then rinse your fingers in, and it takes sort of the fat and the butter and all that off. Yeah, a finger bowl. So she didn't know what to do. So what she did, she picked it up and drank it. And everybody else, because she's the queen and the Empress of India, she's big time. So everyone else picked it up and drank it also. Just, not to embarrass her. It's just a little cultural nuance, you could say. Oh, look, Sadhya Sachi Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Konjani.
I am happy.
Okay. So culture, yeah, different standards. I looked in a dictionary this morning, and let me just tell you a couple of things that I picked up from there. So one is the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits, like characteristics, of a racial, religious, or social group. Yeah. Or the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization, and it mentions a corporate culture, the set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a country, a people, a particular field, particular activity, or social characteristic. And then, then there's, I guess, what the term culture is more associated with, like the art, the singing, the dancing, the paintings, sculptures, and literatures, and maybe clothing. Maybe not so much. Clothing would be in a little different characteristic or category. But yeah, these are all to do with culture, different aspects of culture. So Krishna consciousness, according to Madhukanya Devi Dasi, is, what was it? The perfection of all cultures. Yeah. And that's quite a statement, actually. But, it's very interesting. The subject in general is very interesting. Like etiquettes, what people do in a certain culture or nationality or whatever group. Like the etiquettes, what's considered nice, what is considered not nice. Like I was told, and this is Jai Guranga Prabhu, Hare Krishna, he is, don't mind me saying it, okay, can I say it? He is an echte Afrikaner. You understand what I mean? Sort of his background. But I was told that in Afrikaans culture, when people meet on the street or just meet somewhere, then the younger person must address the older person first.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I had it happen to me too a few times, walking along the streets of some little Afrikaans little sort of dorp. They call it a dorp, isn't it? Years ago, many years ago. And there's some schoolboy walks past, and he says, "Morde to me. You understand Afrikaans? Oh, you don't? I don't either. 10 words. But anyway, it means, good morning, uncle. Good morning, uncle. But then I heard in other cultures that the elder person must address the younger first. And if the younger tries to address the older first, it's like bad manners. Is that, I mean, I heard it was in Zulu culture, it was like that. I mean, I don't know really, but someone told me. Anyway, you get these types of social habits. You get all these types of things, and they're all parts, different aspects of culture. And, you know, oftentimes you get people who are like very well behaved, and they're not loud, they're just very sort of, you know, very cool, like that, and they're considered cultured people. And whereas you get people like, don't tell them I said this, but at least we hear a lot of Americans, oh, I should have said that, who are very loud. I saw a cartoon once in a magazine, a British humour magazine called Punch. And there's this like elderly, middle-aged to elderly American tourist with a big cigar, and he's kind of like really heavily built. And his car is being fixed by a mechanic who's now under the car. And this man with the cigar says, "And what," well, I can't imitate the accent, but, "and what, in your humble opinion, is wrong with the car?" You got that? Anyway. Yeah. So Krishna consciousness then, the perfection of all cultures, you know, the first point, and it's just a really important point, is that Krishna consciousness, when you get down to like the roots and the foundation and the basis of it, what Krishna conscious culture is called, the name for it in Sanskrit is Sad Achar. Sad Achar. Sad or Sat means eternal, and Achar means activity or standard of, like, way of acting, the eternal way of acting. Yeah. Just like Prabhupada, I imagine you've all heard, we call him the founder Acharya. You heard that one? Acharya, right. Acharya, it's derived from this root, achar, which means to act, to perform an activity like that. So founder Acharya means, yeah, I mean, the whole thing in Sanskrit is samsthapak Acharya. And, well, Samstapak basically just means founder. And then Acharya means he's the founding teacher. That's definitely what Prabhupada is. He's the founding teacher who established the teachings and like that. But he didn't just found them or teach them, like talk about them, but he did them. And in this way he demonstrated what he was teaching. He didn't just talk about it. Yeah. Now I remember back in the 80s, where were you in the 80s?
I don't even think my parents were thinking about me.
Previous lifetime, we'd say. Well, I was for a few days in Bloemfontein, at the Bloemfontein agricultural show. It's like the Bloemfontein version of the Randista show. And we were doing fundraising there, me and a couple of other devotees. We were doing fundraising at that show for about a week. And just across from us, we had like a stand. Yeah, and just straight across from us was the Cancer Society. And they were like advocating and distributing literature, particularly about don't smoke because you get cancer. So, it's just across the way from us, and we would talk with them a little bit occasionally. But we noticed that every now and then, like, I don't know, every hour or something like that, he'd disappear. And we thought maybe he has, like, do you know what incontinence is? Like difficulty with his urinary system, and he has to go to the toilet, more often than the average person. So one day, one of the devotees who was with me went out for some reason or other, and who should he bump, almost like walk into? But that young man who was smoking a cigarette. No kidding. And he asked him, "Oh, what happened?" And the fellow, poor fellow, he's trying to do something good, but he's got a habit. And he said, "Yeah, I know what it's all about, but I just have to do it. Sometimes because he's like addicted, basically." Yeah. And another time, I was in Yeovil distributing our literature. This is back also in the 80s, or anyways, back quite a few years. And there's a group of us distributing our literature, and the SPCA, Society for Protection of Cruelty to Animals, was doing fundraising there on the main street of Yeovil. And, we talked to them a bit. And then lunchtime came, and this one young man who we were talking to, he pulled out a hot dog. And one of our devotees said, "Oh, it's a veggie dog, right?" And he said, "No, it's just, it's a hot dog." You know what I mean? And our devotee said, "But wait, you're trying to stop cruelty to animals and to kill. You can't get much more cruel than that." And he hadn't thought of it before. And life is interesting, and you find all sorts of interesting characters with their interesting little situations. Yeah. So, so I was saying Sadacha, Acharya, Prabhupada's founder Acharya. He's the founder who taught. Yeah, I mean, he really taught, like he spoke a lot, huge amount. If they, like in the Bible, the New Testament, there are Christ speaks on a number of occasions, some number of occasions, but Prabhupada, the records we have, the recordings of him lecturing, of like him walking, he used to go for a walk every morning, early in the morning, and he would speak. Some devotees would go with him and he'd bring up different points about different things and explain about them. And then his lectures and his books, there's so much recorded in different formats right from his mouth. If they'd done that with Jesus back a couple of thousand years ago, I think Christianity would be really different from what it is today. And I think the world would be really different from what it is today, actually. So, Achar means, founder Acharya means the founder who teaches, but particularly he teaches by his activities. His actions are demonstrations of the teachings which he, talks about. It's very interesting. So in other words, you can just watch him and you'll learn what it's all about. Just watch him and see how he acts in this situation, that situation, some other situation. And Prabhupada, he was an immensely clever person. Yeah. One time, there are all sorts of different examples. I could tell you different stories of Prabhupada dealing with people and making points in like really interesting ways. But one time, it was 1966 or 7, he was living in New York. Our first center was in New York, Manhattan. And in those days, the 60s, going towards the 70s, it was the hippie movement. And it was really the young people were taking a lot of drugs, really a lot of drugs. Yeah, and one of them, Hare Krishna, welcome. Hare Bol, just sit down and relax. Yeah, and one of them was called LSD, lysergic acid something. LSD was, massively, unbelievably popular. And Prabhupada, in this first center, right kind of in the heart of the hippie community in New York, he was giving lectures Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. And the young people would come. Lots of them would come. But they were all like super heavy druggies. Really just 24/7 taking different drugs. So one time, one famous singer, like a rock musician, one time Prabhupada in the lecture said that you shouldn't take these things, and he explained different reasons why. And this one rock musician who was there, who was quite famous, And he had come with a group of followers, sort of groupie type people. So there's like 10 of them there, and he's in the middle. This fellow interrupts Prabhupada and says, "You're criticizing LSD, but have you ever taken it? Do you know what it's like?" And his group of 10 or some number of people, they all went, "Yeah, right." Yeah, caught him, got him there. And Prabhupada said, "No." Prabhupada said, "Actually, in my life, I haven't even drunk tea or coffee, let alone take these drugs." Prabhupada did say that these young men and young women who are, they're with me and following my teachings and all, they are highly experienced, but me, I don't know. And then the fellow said, "Yeah, well, how can you say these things if you don't even know what it's like?" And Prabhupada said that the thing is, you do not need to eat feces to know that it tastes bad. And it's sort of silence. Yeah. You don't have to try everything. Okay. So anyway, Acharya, Prabhupada was founder Acharya, and he taught by his own example. And all you had to do was watch him. In a sense, you could also listen to him, no problem. But you could just watch him and you'd learn what is Krishna consciousness. And it was like highly instructive. Like I tell you one thing you can learn, Prabhupada, he's a very busy man because he's the head of quite a major institution with eventually, at least after a while, thousands of followers who had many questions and so on. So he was kept busy meeting people and speaking to people for hours every day. But whenever he got like a few minutes spare, you know what he did? Every time, you know what he did? I'll tell you. He picked up his chanting beads and started chanting. He did every single time that he had like, a little break, he'd pick up his beads and start chanting. Because in terms of the activities, well, even if we say sad achar, an eternal standard of activities, practically the first, at least in terms of like learning and getting a bit of a footing, getting a grounding in Krishna consciousness, the first thing is to chant. That's the first thing. And, there's even a famous verse, I'm sure some of you have heard. Harir Nam, Harir Nam, Harir Nam, Eva Kevalam, Kalomas Jeva Nasjeva Nasjeva Katira Gita, which means it's Sanskrit, but it means Harir Nam. Nam means name, and Harir means is sort of a grammatical version of Hari, which is an equivalent of Krishna. So Hari Nam, to chant the names of Krishna, but it's repeated. Hari Nam, Hari Nam, Hari Nam. Chant the names of Krishna, chant the names of Krishna, chant the names of Krishna. Eva Kevalam. Eva means, like it's a strong word, means like certainly, definitely. Yeah, Kevalam. Kevalam means like it's the only thing. It's alone. Yeah. And Kalo means this age we're in now, Kali Yuga, because Sanskrit words, when you say of this or to that or from this or by that or in this or outside that, it's all endings. They're endings. They don't really use prepositions so much, but it's the use of endings, like Russian. Do you speak Russian? Я подумал так. I thought so.
Почему?
А?
Почему вы подумали так?
Пожалуйста, не проблем. Я очень рад видеть вас, встретить с вами. I learned Russian, by the way, anyway. To some degree, but not like him, reasonings. Yeah, so they use endings. These old languages, the old European languages, they use endings more than prepositions. You understand preposition? Like in, on, of, by, through. These are all prepositions, which then sort of control the noun. Sorry if I'm getting too much into grammar. But yeah, so Kalo means in the Kali Yuga. The basic form is Kali, but when you say in the time of Kali, it's Kalo. So in this Kali Yuga, Kalo, Nascheva, Nascheva, Nascheva. Again, it's this Eva, meaning definitely, certainly. It's really like the only thing or the main thing which will help you spiritually. I mean, there's so many things just within Krishna consciousness. There's so many things which help us to become more Krishna conscious. But the first thing and the main thing is the chanting of the names. And it's like that, it becomes like the foundation. And if you do it, then it'll help you so much. Do all the other things which help. But if you do all the other and you don't do that, then, it may not work so well. You get the idea? Yeah. Like, if you live, you got a house, you got clothes, you got a motor car. But if you don't eat, you got a problem, haven't you? It's like a foundation, you got to eat. Otherwise your clothes and etc. it all becomes meaningless. So so sad acha means sad, or it's a form of sat, means eternal standard of activities. Or if we sort of extend it slightly, just a little further, how they live, how they act, how they conduct themselves up there in the kingdom of God. How people act in the kingdom of God. Their standards, of activities, what they do, what they don't do, what they consider right, what they consider wrong. This is all sad achar, the eternal standard of activities. And here, if we apply it here, I mean, we're all brought up in this or that sort of culture. Okay, that's all right. But, in all the cultures, there are some things which are connected with, like, sadachar. Like, according to my limited understanding of Zulu culture, they take cows very seriously. Am I right? Yes. I think so. Yeah. They take cows very seriously. And maybe not just Zulus, but as from what I've seen, if a young man wants to marry a young lady, at least traditionally, and I think it's still applied. I mean, I've seen it applied just in, I think, the last couple of years. One of our devotee young men wanted to marry one young girl, and he had to get the father, I forget how many cows, but I think it was not just one. So, that's very interesting. I mean, actually, it's very good. It's better than the European Western culture, where cows are good for milk, but as soon as they stop giving milk, you just eat them. It's not very nice. At least this is a more respectful type of attitude towards cows. So in all cultures, because the root of all cultures are ultimately coming from God. Everything comes from God. We come from God. Everything, what this building is built of, comes from God. Everything comes from God. So the cultures of the different nationalities and different groupings of different types, they've got their roots there. But in the meantime, in so many cases, they all sort of, they went off in another direction after some time, and therefore they picked up some things which are not good, which are not really conducive or not part of the Sadacha, the eternal standard of activities, or how people live in the kingdom of God. And, if you're going to live in a certain place, and you're from like a totally different background, you've got to kind of tune in to how the people, you've got to learn the language. That's the first thing. That's how come I can speak some Russian, at least, put it that way, because I spend so much time in Russia. So I can going back 20 years ago, I didn't even know da or niet, which means yes and no. I didn't know at all. Nothing, literally. But then because I started going there, like 4 or 5 months a year for about 20 years or something, so I learned the language. At least to communicate and converse and even give lectures with assistance. So you've got to do that. You've got to tune into the local culture. If you don't, then you sort of stick out like a sore thumb, and you become like, people won't take you seriously. I read something very interesting. I consider it interesting about a year or something like that ago. This young man, American, but his parents were Italian. They came from Italy to America, and he was then born in America. And at home, they only spoke Italian. So he spent the first 20 odd years of his life, at home at least, only speaking Italian. And you get pretty fluent if you're doing like that every day for 20 years. Then he went to work in Italy. And one day he was in some small, a village, staying at a boarding house. And he's staying upstairs. A phone call came for him down at the reception downstairs. And he heard the lady, the secretary, who took the call, telling one of the other workers in Italian, "Can you tell Mr. Such and Such there's a call for him?" And the other worker said, "Who?" Who's he? And the lady who took the call said, "Now you know him, the foreigner who can't speak Italian." Did you get that? And he's been speaking it for like 25 years plus. Yeah. So, yeah, you've got to kind of tune into the culture wherever you go. Yeah. Otherwise, it's problematic. And you won't be able to really, get into things and develop relationships so easily. So when we come to Krishna consciousness, naturally, there's some things, maybe not like a huge amount, and you've got to like relearn how to live, but there's a few things, and it's only natural. It's not a big deal. It's not like, wow, how to do it. But there's a few things in Krishna consciousness. Yeah. Anyway, the good news is, there's a lot of good news, but part of it is Krishna consciousness can be expressed in any language. That's good news, isn't it? Krishna speaks all languages. Don't worry, Krishna speaks Afrikaans. Yes, sorry. But Krishna speaks Zulu, Sotho, Tswana, and etc., etc. Pedi. Krishna speaks Pedi, Northern Sotho. He does. And I bet you he's more fluent than you may be in your own language. Really. So, yeah, Krishna's nice. Krishna's like, what would you say? It's not just proactive, but Krishna's kind of socially sensitive to people and where they're coming from and what sort of people they are and how they live and how they think and how they talk. But still, naturally, there's some adjustments to be made. But you don't have to learn another language. You can learn Sanskrit if you want, because it's sort of the original old language with, these endings and complexities, like Krishnaya. The ending aya means to Krishna. Krishnena means by Krishna or with Krishna. I mean, you just pick these things up if you read the books. So, but you can just speak English or whatever language comes easiest to you and go for it. But naturally, there are some things in Krishna consciousness which are different, somewhat different at least. And we have to adjust to them to become Krishna conscious, to really be successful and really be happy in Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, I mentioned that, like a or the foundational activity, at least in the early stages, is the chanting. I remember when the first day I visited a Hare Krishna temple, it was late 1972. I will not ask you where you were in 1972. But I went for the first time to a Hare Krishna temple. I had actually seen Prabhupada when I was because I'm born actually in New Zealand. When I was in university in Auckland, New Zealand, Prabhupada came to the university, April 1972. But then I went to England, so I was in London and I visited the temple for the first time. And they just sort of casually gave me some beads and said, yeah, just take them. we chant, he said, we chant 16 rounds a day. They didn't get into it at all. He said, yeah, just go, just chant. So I did, for half an hour. I tried, and I tell you what, after half an hour, my mind was all over the universe. It was just sure. I couldn't get into it because I was just not used to it at all. So I couldn't get into it. And after half an hour, I chanted 2 rounds, my first 2 rounds. And I thought, you know what I thought? This is not for me. That's what I thought initially. This is not for me. When you go to chant, they emphasize chanting. And I can't do this. But anyway, there are other things which I found interesting. Like I mentioned, the chanting is there, but there are other things. There's many things. And there are other things that I was very interested in, which are parts of Krishna consciousness, directly or indirectly. Would you believe, and I don't want to shock any of you, that I was very interested in the occult. You know what I mean by occult? Magic. Yes. Magic. Have you heard of Aleister Crowley? Good. Just forget about him. He was a magician, like a black magic, black-white. I was very interested in these things. And there's that aspect is there in Krishna consciousness, at least to some degree. I mean, it's more peripheral. It's not really like part of the focal point of what is Krishna consciousness, but it's there somewhere. So there were these other things which I found interesting, so I stuck at it. And, after a couple of weeks, I had a breakthrough with the chanting. And I found that one day I was going, hey, I'm chanting and hearing the chanting, and I'm not just thinking about this and that and whatever else. I'm into it. I'm absorbed in it. It was like unintentional, actually. It just happened like that. And then I was feeling so good. It was just amazing. And then I thought to myself, that's what they're talking about. That's what they say, it's like, yeah. And that was just after a couple of weeks from having had, you could say a bad experience, definitely not a good experience. So we have to tune in a bit. Tuning in, like, I don't think now so much, but back when I was a child, if you had a radio, you had to tune the knobs, otherwise you get all this interference. Or a television. I remember when my parents got our first television, it was in the 1950s, black and white TV. And we had a 2-story house. My father was up by the chimney trying to put the aerial up. And my mother was downstairs fiddling with the TV set. And she told him, just a little further. No. And my poor father up and just trying to adjust the aerial. Otherwise you get they call it snow. It's just rubbish. Yeah, so you got to tune in. At least in those days you had to tune in. And there's so we have to tune in to Krishna consciousness, like We can tune into the chanting. And if we do, or when we do, then we get an experience like what I had. Like, that's what they're talking about. Oh, yeah, right. But there's a really interesting story. Listen to this. In America, in the late 20s, 1928, 29, the American economy just completely collapsed. And basically, 90% of the businesses went bankrupt. And all the banks, the people came and took all their money out. And all the banks went bankrupt. And because there's hardly any businesses functioning, people couldn't get a job. And many people, they ended up, after like 6 months, eating sawdust. You know sawdust? If you saw some wood, you get this sort of flaky stuff. They were eating sawdust. Yeah, and so many people died because of this total devastation of the American financial system. So, if there was ever a job available, you would get at least 500 people queuing up. Even if it was like a technical job and they just didn't know anything about it, but they'd come because they were desperate. So Western Union, you've probably heard of Western Union, they can send money and they're like communications and all that. Western Union. So they needed a Morse code operator. Morse code means that you tap a little sending device, and for example, 3 short taps means S, and 3 long taps means O. I'm teaching a bit of Morse code and use script in the future. So, dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, 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 means SOS, which means save our souls. It means we have an emergency, please help us. SOS. That's Morse code. So they needed a Morse code operator. But how many people know Morse code in Johannesburg, in this room? I know SOS, but I don't know anything more at all. It's just something people don't know unless they've been trained in it. So they needed a Morse code operator, like for making telegrams. So they had to advertise, and 500 people came, and 99% of them didn't know Morse code, but they're just desperate. So there's this queue, and one by one, they're going into the boss's office, and he finds out they don't know Morse code, he just sends them away. So one young man was at the end of the queue. Suddenly, he ran up, and he just ran into the boss's office. He ran past all the people in the queue. And all the people thought, what is this? We'll get this guy. What does he think he's doing? Jumping the queue. So then, a minute or so later, the boss came out with the young man, with his arm around the shoulder of the young man, and said, you can all go home. He's got the job now. And they thought, we're going to get this guy. But then the boss explained, the thing is, he knows Morse code. And in that building, there was some construction going on. And there was hammering. And the boss said, the thing is, these workers are hammering in Morse code. And what they're saying is, if you understand this, come straight to the office and we'll give you the job immediately. So you got to tune in. He was tuned in and he got the job. And everybody else, it was just like, all these noises and means nothing. And they didn't get the job. So we got to tune in Krishna consciousness. We got to tune in, particularly to the chanting. And at first, I don't know what your experience was like. I told you what my experience was, and I tell you what, it wasn't good. But I stuck at it, and then eventually, because it's transcendental, it's like universal transcendence. It works for every human being, at least. It works. If you apply yourself, doesn't matter what language you speak, what sort of social environment you were brought up in. If you were Russian or Chinese, it's very different. Or, Southeast Asian, like Cambodian or Indian or European, French, German, etc., etc. It doesn't matter. Makes literally no difference. But if you get into the chanting and if you're willing to persevere, even though sometimes, it may be a little bit of a challenge, it's easy to get distracted, but if you apply yourself, then after a little while you find, you break through. And you find, wow, actually, it's really nice. In fact, it's amazing, actually, because it's something eternal and something transcendental. It's transcendental to our whatever cultural background we're from. It's transcendental to that. So, in Krishna consciousness, in Krishna conscious culture, I'm sure you've found out by now, we emphasize the chanting. But there are other things, like prasadam. Have you encountered prasadam?
Yes.
I think so, yeah. Chanting is what they call the Yuga Dharma, the recommended spiritual activity for this time, Kali Yuga. But just imagine if the Yuga Dharma, the recommended religious activity was eating prasadam. Did you ever think of that? You like prasadam?
Yes.
Me too. I've been living on it for more than 50 years and never looked back. But just imagine if that was the main thing. There are other things too, but that's the main thing we must focus on first. I think we would all have put on a lot of weight by now. Anyway, it's another thing and it's part of it. And we should try and get used to it because, it's just part of the culture. And it's nice. It's the easiest thing to get used to in Krishna consciousness, actually. The knowledge, the chanting, and, whatever. Getting up early in the morning, these things may be challenging. But for 99.9% of the people, the food is no problem at all. They love it. They love it. Yeah. The only time I had a problem with prasadam was I was in London. It was the 70s, later 70s.